rather than a politically negotiated solution. And that is where I think the real battle lies for us, or the real challenge lies for us, which is how does media then challenge its own, you know, the shivers that they have created now, and which has become a problem, and at the same time is able to then inform and report in a manner which would allow for emergence of an understanding and a pressure on the authorities to think in terms of other paths than military suppression as a way of solving the various conflicts that plague us.
Thank you, Gautam, for giving us overall perception on this coverage and the role of media in the changing nature of political discourse. Now I would like to welcome Mr. Vipul.
My name is Vipul Mudgal, and I used to be a journalist, and I have now taken a sabbatical, and I work for an academic institution called the CSDS, Center for the Study of Developing Societies in Delhi. And we work on some of these issues, media and democracy and stuff like that. I really want to congratulate people who have devised today's topic, changing nature of political discourse and conflict in South Asia. Challenges for the media. I think it's quite a complicated line. It will do justice with academics, you know, changing discourse of politics in India, and I think something that all of us see, but we can't really put our finger on it, what is going on. From the point of view of the media, in very short, as I see it, I would see that we have seen for a long time what is called the politicization of media. And of course, the way the media ownership works, it's quite simple, right in front of us, that media's ownership decides which way media is going to go. We also know that media has been almost like the voice of the establishment and not the voice of the people, etc., etc. But there's something very interesting going on in political processes around that, around us, and that is, to me, a very fascinating thing, which is from politicization of media, we are moving towards mediaization of politics. Now, mediaization of politics has another issue very central to it, and that is the kind of society in which we are living. The societies are becoming mediated societies. Now, the crux of a mediated society is that we do not consume first-hand politics. We consume second-hand politics. We as individuals do not take part in trade union activities. We do not take part in any group activity as such. We don't even go to, there are not even clubs where you can go and play carom board with friends. There are, you know, I think places where what is called the social capital formation happens are actually getting more and more reduced. So we as people are consuming second-hand politics. And if you see how it is happening in the so-called developed countries, also liberal democratic countries of the West, their consumption of politics indirectly, the vicarious consumption of politics is almost 60, 70, 80%, which means people actually do not take part in any processes around them. They only see reality as shown on television. Now, I know Gautam mentioned the word perception management, impression management. There are a whole lot of industries which are thriving around this concept of mediated societies or the concept of mediaization of politics. In brief, the mediaization of politics is a process in which the entire politics is, even the political parties, how they look at the world is not through any major intervention. They look at their own constituency, their own people, through the media, through the eyes of the media, which means that if you are not media savvy, if you can't give news bites, if you are not really presentable, if you don't come across as somebody who does not interrupt others, who's a good listener, not a good, apart from being a good speaker, then you are welcome. So obviously there are more and more people who are telegening who are representing political parties, who are spokespersons of political parties, who are deciding in what direction the political party will go. So this is the mediaization of politics, where the entire the political space is negotiated, it is worked upon, it's planned, the planning is done only from the point of view of how things are going to appear rather than how things are. So, I mean, the first part of it, the changing nature of political discourse, I think this is one thing that we have to keep in mind. And because we live in mediated societies, and the mediation is done mostly by the media industry, not just the television news that we consume, but also the soaps we watch, or the kind of movies we see, or whatever is happening all around us. We see actually, because the mediation is instant, and it's like done on an assembly line every day, every minute perhaps. So there are a lot of processes which go on in between, and some of those processes are actually the impression management, the impression industry, the spin and hype industry, in which you can actually convert day into night and night into day, as you do for film shootings. So very often you actually create situations where the entire world starts believing that this is actually night when it is 12 noon. Like the weapons of mass destruction. Now, why was the media, the picture that people were getting, in not just in one country but across the globe, was a picture that, look, this is a foregone conclusion, that this is something which is happening. This has to be tackled only this way, and we know, I mean, there is no time to actually go into each one of these things, but we know that how it was exposed by BBC in the UK, and we saw that there was a war room kind of strategy which was adopted by the spin doctors who were working on behalf of the Labour Party at that time. And these people were actually meeting 4 times a day. It was like a media war room where every day a perception was taken that, look, I mean, how far are we going? Is anybody stepping out of the line? Is any newspaper asking uncomfortable questions? Then you don't really have to do something as crude as banning advertisements for them. You speak to the editor. You send your media managers there. You bombard them with irrelevant information. You give them flack. Like bombard them with objections, or probably file a couple of suits here and there. So we actually saw that what came out in the British press later was that the dossier which was prepared by the intelligence agencies confirming that the weapons of mass destruction are perhaps there were also sexed up by the people, by the spin doctors who were working on behalf. So this is just one small example of impression management which goes into things. Much later, it was realized that no, this was actually completely wrong. I mean, there was not just weapons of mass destruction were not there, but I mean, there was absolutely no question of even chemical and biological weapons there, which were also, by the way, it was said that they are there. So, I mean, for me, there's a major change going on, churning going on in the society around us. Political discourse is being mediated and presented to the people in such a way that you start believing what is being shown to you, and there are no other voices around. So that is one part of it. So I'll drop it here, and if there are more, I mean, anybody wants to discuss, we can talk about it later. The second thing that I want to say is the changing nature of conflict. Now, if you see the conflict around us, you see Afghanistan, there is something going on, there is something going on in Iraq, and there are things obviously going on in India, which we see. But when there is use of machines for fighting insurgency or fighting people, let us say, then it is a very, very mechanized war. It is progressively becoming more and more mechanized, and the casualties are becoming higher, and it is becoming almost like, for the players who play, it's almost like playing a Nintendo game, you know, like a video game playing. You are killing people. In fact, the drone now, we all know, we don't have to elaborate on this, that it goes and it actually, even if you capture a drone, you can't get anything from there because all the pictures it has taken and all the stuff it has actually heard or eavesdropped is already transmitted there. It's a dot that you get. So, and of course, it can really attack and drop bombs and kill people, and you know, the casualty rate is so high that apart from the people you're going to get, I mean, we have seen in Afghanistan that the whole villages have been wiped out. So we say that the changing nature of political discourse and the changing nature of conflicts. Now, to me, I think anybody who has not seen that particular video of WikiLeaks, which is showing the photographer in Iraq being attacked from a helicopter, you know, I think must immediately do a Google search. I mean, I have it here. If you have time, maybe we can see it in one of the sessions. You know, it's almost like playing a video game. There is a plus, you know, there is a cross which goes and locks on somebody's face, and then the 30 mm gun, which is like bigger than a machine gun, goes and gets that guy. And you know, there's a body which is writhing. You know, they're saying, "Oh, that guy is still alive. Hey, get him, get him!" You know, it's like you hear this and you see that this is nothing but a video game going on. So we see that the changing nature of conflict, and this is something which is going to manifest itself in the internal conflicts also. And I think this is very worrying for all of us. But I mean, I have to drop even this part here because we have to move on. We have to talk about the challenges for the media. And I would give you a couple of examples from the Indian situations, although some are very old, some are new. And since we were talking about Operation Blue Star and Black Thunder yesterday, so let me just elaborate on that. But in very briefly, say that when Operation Blue Star took place in India, there was, you know, very little documentation done. And when the operation was over, we all know that there was a press censorship. The electricity was cut in the entire city of Amritsar. All the telephone lines had been cut, and all the machines of all printing presses were also stopped. All the journalists were, foreign journalists and journalists who had come from Delhi, they had taken away from their hotel rooms, and in guarded buses, they were taken outside the boundaries of Punjab. And an operation took place, which was, I think, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong in that. Innocent people died. It was done on a day which was absolutely the most wrong date, if you were to choose, was a date of Amavasya when thousands of people come to darshan of the temple. I mean, I'm not going into too much of that, but the fact is that when the government wanted to release the figures, this was also one of the very few events in India since independence when a white paper was issued in Parliament of India. Now, white paper apparently is something very big, in which the government actually gives you a blow-by-blow account of how it was built up and what we did, what they did, and everything. So it's a huge paper, but the number of deaths they have given in that is actually not very clear. And whatever they've given in that, nobody believed. I think the number was ridiculously low. Later on, different people gave different numbers. I think Khushwant Singh gave a number of 1800 or something, but he was also quoting some other. There's some people who quote the number SGPC was like very high, something like 10,000, 8,000 or whatever, which was also wrong, which was way above that. And then even people who were picked up from the Golden Temple, they were later called Jodhpur retinues because it was discovered much later that they were actually in Jodhpur. Otherwise, we didn't even know where these people went. So, I mean, that's why I'm saying that documentation actually in these cases is very, very important. But the documentation was either not done during Operation Blue Star, or if it was done, it was destroyed completely. And what also got destroyed in the process was the credibility of the government. Because nobody, even to this day, it was almost like Pakistan's Kargil, in which Pakistan did not concede for a long time that the guys who were participating in the operation were also the regular military people. So once you start denying the obvious, it becomes very difficult for you to justify later when you want to use the same thing for some purpose, for your own purpose. So in the case of Operation Blue Star, even when the government gave figures of 600 army people killed, no, even army families themselves did not believe the number. I mean, see the kind of lack of credibility there. And later on, there was another operation, which was Operation Black Thunder, which happened many years later, and it was in 1989. The first was in 1984. So in Operation Black Thunder, the government, I think there was some lessons learned, perhaps from the strategic point of view, or shall we say, from the whatever other security point of view. There was some institutional memory also created that, look, if you want to keep, the credibility, then you have to take the media with you. And a situation came in an 8-day, 9-day operation. Pandey is here, he would know that the media was throughout there, and they were not allowed to go out. In fact, at one particular time on the 9th or 8th day, some of us decided to walk out. We said, it's like too much is happening, and we are too tired, and there was curfew all around, and there was nothing to eat. So in fact the army people, the security forces people came and they said, please don't go. At least don't go, all of you together. Otherwise there will be trouble. We want some of you to be around. I mean, you can go in batches. So it was like that. They produced puri chola from some food items from the CRPF, from the Central Reserve Police canteen. So it so happened that after the operation was over, there were 2 or 3 bodies lying there, and they were doing Panchnama of those bodies. And I mentioned this, I think, once to some friends. Some of us were there. And Panchnama was taking very long time, and because it was the month of May, and the bodies were rotting in open sun for about 7 or 8 days. So there was huge stink there of human bodies. And so when the first Panchnama was done, Panchnama is a long process in which you hand over the dead bodies to the Red Cross, and then the identification is done, and then the handing over and things like that. Magistrate comes, so it takes about 45 minutes or even more, an hour or so. So there was it was impossible for anybody to stand there. So they got a municipality truck brought, and they took the first body and started doing the Panchnama for the second body. It was a covered truck which takes garbage, and the second one came and took the second body. So when we were coming out of the operation, journalists were told by some militant-minded kind of political parties that there were 2 truckloads of bodies which were taken out of the Golden Temple. But because the journalists were right there in front, nobody believed them. And there were numbers being given. There was one particular leader who was a very responsible leader I thought until then he was a very responsible leader, who gave me he said first truck had 66 bodies, and the second one had whatever, 49. But the fact was, because everybody had seen. So we saw actually that when there is transparency in the siege operations, whether it is done by the army, that there is an official Secrets Act in India which is like absolutely obsolete. I mean, it was something borrowed from the Brits, and we have no business continuing it without a review. So this has to go. And then there should be, every document must have a gestation period. Like you have a sell-by date for every product. You have every document, whatever it is. I mean, even if the life is 50 years, you open some documents 50 years later, let us say some documents say indefinitely, but you would not say that there is anything about state or governance or fighting our own people which will never be made public. I think that it should be taken out of the collective psyche of the country, some kind of a legislation. Some figures can come out 5 years later, 10 years later, that kind of data, there can be categorization of secrecy in that sense. I mean, given that sometimes state has to maintain secrecy. So I think if we basically harp on this and we say that we have institutional